1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3.
Everyone, is this right? Everyone, we might start in about 3 or 4 minutes, so grab your coffees and come join us. Come fill up the front. Welcome, everyone. That side. Morning, everyone. Yay, can everyone hear? Yes, all right. Welcome. It's a great delight to be here, and thank you very much for being here as well. My name's Matthew Diener. I'm the CEO of Screen Producers Australia. I just want to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land. It's a great privilege to be here, and thank also Fox Studios for having us today. This is one of the 3 things that this organisation that I look after does. We do a lot of events and a lot of activities that culminate in Screen Forever. We also do a lot of policy work and run a lot of industrial programs that help make sure that there's a continuity and support for our industry and stability across all of the different bits of contracting. It sounds very dry, but it's very important. To that end, we've just announced a voiceover agreement for the first time for animation, which is great news, with our colleagues at the MEAA. So that helps to build Australian voices. We've been, I think, a number of productions have had to go offshore to do the various deals they've needed to do as part of that. So we're really excited about that. Okay, we do these breakfasts. We love doing them because they're a great way to get insight and opportunity to kind of talk to the people that are driving our industry forward. And to that end, we're really delighted to have Michael Carrington here. So thank you very much, Michael.
Morning.
Cheers. Can I just also say, Michael Carrington's also known as Michael Andrew Chuprin Plica. That's right. Discuss. That's your Wikipedia. That's your Wikipedia page entry.
Oh, right, okay.
You know that it's kind of rare that you get someone to talk to who's got a Wikipedia page all about them. So your background's very interesting.
It depends on your perspective. My father is Russian and is the result of the Russian Revolution and the Second World War, and so we're refugees basically. We arrived in Australia. I'm first generation, and my father met my English mother from Yorkshire, who was a 10-pound pom.
Over
so
here.
It's one of those stories.
And changed his name to fit into the culture here, or is that part of what it was?
It's, when you have a foreign name, it's quite difficult. When I was born in the 60s, so being a new Australian, I guess people are facing the same kind of racism, bigotry and sexism that they do today.
Yay!
Well, nothing changes.
No.
Well, it has changed a bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because we might get into some sort of broader issues about how we as an industry respond, and I guess the particular lens we have around children that may be a way of shifting some of those conversations.
Well, it has obviously formed my own approach to life, growing up as a minority group. I'm also gay, by the way, so...
Woohoo! Announcement. Great. Join the club.
Oh dear, now I'm so embarrassed.
Do you know Michael got fined $250 coming here today? I know.
It cost me $250 to get here.
Drug tested. No, it wasn't drugs.
Well,
it was joking.
They went, look at that Russian.
It's racial profiling.
It was. No, I crossed a bus lane. not
Yeah.
100 meters before the crossing. So
So
anyway.
there will be a collection that we take for Michael to pay for this today. All right, let's get into this. Because I looked you up on Wikipedia, this is the list of the things that you have at some point or other been doing. DJ, Royal Australian Navy sailor. There's probably a whole heap of jokes there.
There's a big story there.
Yeah, game show producer, Discovery Channel, BBC, CBBC, Lego, Hit Entertainment, Cartoon Network, The Foundation, Zodiac. What do you want to, like, where that gives you this sort of weird and wonderful set of experiences. So do you want to just sort of, well, you're here today representing the ABC, but you've got a huge number of years behind you. What does that taught you
When you
about
say
what
huge.
you need? Yeah. A generous number of years. There we go. What does it taught you about what you need to know in your job now, all of those different component parts? Let's start with DJing. No, let's start with the broad picture.
Yeah. I was a radio announcer on radio station 2PK in central New South Wales. My parents dragged me from Sydney when I was 12 to the country. I learnt what a sheep does. I learnt what a sheep was. That was an interesting experience going from the city to the country in itself. So I have the country-city perspective. I went into broadcasting because I didn't know what else I would do in life. I thought about being a school teacher or a lawyer or a train driver. So they're quite disparate careers. But I ended up in 2PK as an announcer, and that like most Australian jobs, you basically have to do everything. You have your job, and then you have your job that is surrounding your job, and that's the same today. It's the same experience I had at Channel 10. But I guess I got a bit scared. I was only 18, 19, finished my HSC, went to 2PK, and then I realised that I was in this square box with a microphone, and it was just me. And I had this fright that I would be 40 years old and still trapped in that box.
Right.
So that inspired me to get out of parks.
The physical parameter.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
Yeah, physical and psychologically, and growing up gay in the country was really quite difficult. So I went to the Big Smoke, discovered the midnight shift, and then joined the Royal.
Very personal.
Then joined the Royal Australian Navy.
Okay.
But I joined the Navy because I thought it would make me a man. I thought it would, turn me into something else, and it didn't. But it was a great experience because, I was representing Australia. The ship that I was on, go figure, I was posted to this ship that was a former ferry between Melbourne and Hobart. So it had cabins and en-suites and a ballroom. I didn't do it hard in the Navy, unlike my brother who was posted onto this frigate and, his bed was about that big. Anyway, that's another story. But after I left the Navy, because I realised that it didn't matter what rank you got to, there was always somebody above you telling you what to do, and I just couldn't cope with that. It was like, you can't shave. And if you do stop shaving, you have to keep your beard for 11 weeks. You can't go to the fridge, get a ham sandwich. You can't go and get a drink without somebody, giving you permission. So I left the Navy and I thought I would go back to broadcasting. I just got hired at 4BH. I think it was 4BH. Yeah. And anyway, I met somebody at Channel 10 and they said, "Wow, you don't want to go there. Come to Channel 10." And Channel 10 was, it was the heady days.
So
they were at North Ryde in New South Wales, just outside Sydney. They bought this lot and there were lots of houses with swimming pools and fridges full of booze. And it was a crazy, crazy time. It was just before...
The 90s? Are we talking the 90s?
Yeah, we're talking...
80s.
80s. Gosh, 80s. And, because of the quotas, Channel 10 had to do children's programming. And they had Simon Townsend's Wonder World. That had just been axed, I think, when I'd arrived at Channel 10. And they were doing a magazine show called Off the Dish. And I joined just as that finished and became Rigididge.
Hey!
It was through Rigididge that I learnt the production craft. I started as a runner. Where I was photocopying with photocopying with those big purple rotor things.
I think this audience, I feel like there's half the room going, absolutely no idea what that means. So at least half, but keep going, yeah. No.
But so I started my career again at the bottom of the run and worked my way through production. Eventually, Ian Fairweather, who was the head of children's, an amazing man, very generous and very nurturing, and he taught me, what television was about, what children's programming was about. They were,
Ian Fairweather used to be Fat Cat, didn't he? He used to actually be. I thought there was a history of him being.
He was Mr.
Sorry,
Spock.
thank you. Right, there we are.
He was the big moustached guy on the Curiosity show on Friday evenings. I remember that. But he was working with the ACTF. They were just formed, I think, in those early days. They'd just done a series of films called The Winners, and we were exposed to live action, to magazine shows. We were just starting a game show. We bought the Nickelodeon format for Double Dare, so Channel 10 was making Double Dare, and it was a huge success. And we were buying in animation. I met Dean Taylor in those days, and he was the only animator I'd ever come across in my life. And I didn't realise that, Hanna-Barbera had a studio in North Sydney, and that kind of, I mean, the Flintstones, all sorts of things were made in Australia that you had no idea.
Wow.
And we'll talk about that when we get to the present. But so that I had a full range of experiences across, drama and magazine, factual and animation, and that was great. But then suddenly Channel 10 went into the toilet again. Was it the first time? I'm not sure.
I think it was the first time.
There you go.
I should just say, by the way, that this is in Chatham House rule exercise. So we are streaming it to some of our members. We've got our members, but this is the Chatham House rule. So we're going to be in conversation for about half an hour. Then there'll be questions. So anyway, so feel free to rip into the Channel 10 more.
Fast because I guess. All I'm saying, these kind of moments in my life have led me to where I am, and they've given me the experience that I have, and so. That moment that Channel 10 was sold for $1 and the big debt went from Westfields to, is it Comcast or whatever? Sorry?
Comcast.
Ken West.
In the 90s, yeah.
Anyway, there was that moment, and I thought, God, I'm not going to work in a boring old warehouse in Ultimo. My life is better than that. So I went to London. And I was just, again, really fortunate that I met somebody who was starting a production company, and they had a commission from Channel 4. So I went in there as a production manager, got to know the UK landscape, and found myself at the BBC in the children's department, because the children's area is the passionate bit, the piece that I love the most, because you get to do everything.
Yeah, why? Well, I mean, why gravitate towards that? Why be in the children's space?
Well, first of all, I guess I was an insatiable TV viewer as a child, sitting in Campbelltown watching this little black and white TV, which I had to go to my neighbours to watch. Those stories were just so amazing. They inspired me and stimulated me and took me away from where I was. So that kind of catapulted me into wanting to tell stories. And I didn't know what. At first I thought I might want to be a performer, and then I realised that putting on makeup and doing my hair every morning and looking good was not going to do it for me. So I thought, okay, let's go behind the scenes.
Okay.
So that was the inspiration. But going from Channel 10 to the BBC was, it was a shock, because in the UK, children's presenters were on the front cover of Hello magazine, and they were feted and loved and celebrated. And I thought, this is incredible, because here in this country we just went, children's programming, what is that? You obviously have to be a child to work in children's.
Why do we do that? Why is that? I mean, there's certain people that have gotten profiles, and Simon Townsend, for example, was a household name, and there were people that do and TV hits and all that sort of
still alive. I heard him on the radio the other day. I think it's because we don't celebrate it, and so in those days you couldn't win an Academy Award or a BAFTA or a Logie for a children's program. It just wasn't given any credence.
Right.
People didn't recognise that craft was identical. To make a primetime drama was the same as making a children's drama. To make an animated series took 2 years of sweat and tears. So people just don't realise the amount of work that goes on in the children's industry.
We still today, there are payments, there are licence fees that are lower. There's an expectation that you can make children's content cheaper, not put as much thought and effort into it. It still exists, doesn't it?
Well,
is that?
I think cheaper, yes. I think people realise that love and attention has to go into it because they're our children. But the thought that it's cheaper is still inherent in all industries across the world. And again, they don't fathom in the fact that you're working with children. You can't whip them. You can't work them for 24
Not in
hours.
Public, Michael. No.
Exactly. The Victorian era has gone, and we're liable for all sorts of extra work. Everybody has to be checked for a working with children certificate. Children come with chaperones and teachers and family, and there's all of these other things that go on top of making a drama series or a live action series for children that they don't appreciate.
So I do want to, because there's a lot to talk about, I want to speed you through a little bit of, you did a number of different roles across the UK for maybe about 10 years, more, 15 years.
27,
which is okay. Just trying to be polite.
But I guess, I've worked in production, I've worked in commissioning, I've worked in programming, and I've run a studio. So, yeah.
And you've been back home for about
1 year and 9 months.
Okay, and welcome home. It's a bit overdue, and acknowledging that. But coming back, you brought a lot of experience back. What did you find when you came here, and why did you want to come back? What was the reason for, presumably, and from according to everything you've been doing, you were had a great role in the UK, you were doing very well. What was the draw?
That's you have to make personal decisions in your life. Being 12,000 miles away from elderly parents was becoming tricky, and so I felt I had to come back before they popped off, really.
Okay, and so what did you discover about Australia that you'd left behind? I mean, I know you'd kept in touch, and you should acknowledge that the children's television and content industry is a very united, tight group of people. So it's not like you didn't know what was going on. But was there anything that surprised you, or you were, alarmed or delighted by, perhaps, when you arrived back after having seen what was going on?
Two things. Fortunately, from the UK, I was able to commission Australians to produce stuff for the BBC. So I spent about £15 million over my BBC career in Australia, which was a good thing.
Did that get a lot of hatred from UK producers?
No, not at all.
Oh, okay.
Because the BBC's always kind of looked outwards.
Yeah.
They have a big internal studio, which has now been commercialised. But they've always had this two-pronged approach, the best of British and the best of the rest of the world. So that wasn't an issue. I guess the stories that I was hearing coming back from Australia, and I'm talking about the narrative dramas and animation series that I was involved in, led you to believe that Australia was much more open and freer and forward-thinking than actually you find when you come back after 27 years. And that little bit racist, little bit bigoted, little bit sexist, little bit bonkers still exists on the fringes, and we've just experienced that with a lot of right-wing white male hate over the last few weeks. We celebrated Mardi Gras, the 40th anniversary, as the whole of the ABC did, and we put up a little film with children of LGBTQI families, and people just object to that.
Really?
They say that we're sexualizing children. I'm gay. I was 5 when I realised that. Okay, it was a little bit retrospective, and it took me 26 more years to come to terms with it. But I never saw anybody but Ian Featherstone, what was his name, on Number 96. So there was this really effeminate gay character that was just not me. So to expose children to reflect their own lives, the diversity of the life here is really important to me, and I don't think we do enough of it. But the minute you do, you get a whole section of society throwing eggs at you.
You'd get the data probably from, I don't know, somewhere in the ABC as to who's complaining and what the issue is. I just always wonder if it's this very, 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 very small pocket of people that are very squeaky and maybe fueled by other agendas that are kind of attacking in those instances. But is that what you think?
Potentially.
Right. I think this is disproportionate kind of dialogue.
It is, but it feels very kind of powerful because of social media. We had to, unfortunately, close down our Facebook page for ABC Me recently because they'd just taken it over. And you had the right in the USA and the right in the UK making comments on Australian children's Facebook page, which was just extraordinary. Anyway, I don't want to get bogged down into that, but it's also about gender. We spent a lot of time over the last year or so working very closely with producers and directors and nurturing new female talent, both on screen and off screen, and that's also been lambasted by
the public, by this element,
certain sector of society. Yeah.
Well, so there's possibly agendas that are being run in that way, but in terms of broader feedback and the type of response you're getting to what you're doing at the moment, how's that broadly been with maybe more the audience that you're trying to attract? What's going on there, and what are you learning about the things that you should be doing and shouldn't be doing? And I was also wanting to pivot that to a broader conversation about how the children's content's changed, perhaps when you left and when you came back, and whether you were distinctly alarmed about where things were, or whether you were excited. And,
There's a lot in there, but so when I left, obviously 7, 9 and 10 fulfilled their quotas, but generally with magazine shows and drama here and a drama there. When I came back, there's a vibrancy and there's a quality and there's a distinctiveness about Australian production that is, world class. And we play on the world stage, and quite rightly, because the passion, enthusiasm and professionalism of Australian producers is way up there. And so I found the quality of the stories and the passion behind the scenes is terrific and tremendous. I was disappointed about the money. I was shocked that there's very little money for the industry, for the children's industry.
Do you mean from commercial broadcasters, from your own ABC?
From everywhere. The ABC pays a license fee, but
changing that, I assume.
Sorry?
You're changing a bit of that.
I push and pull and cajole and nurture and love people as much as I can internally to help guide them with bigger investment in children's programming. But it's it's.
Who are the names that you'd like us to talk to internally to help you?
So that was quite shocking, because in the BBC I could go and 100% fund a 26 half-hour drama. You cannot do. There's no way you can do that here.
So, what's the maximum that you're likely to ever be able to cajole out of someone, other than the licence fee? But what sort of percentages are we talking about that you can probably get to with a bit of wrangling?
It's a quarter. A quarter of a massive budget.
So that throws back to, and I think it's worth just trying to understand the environment now. And I don't know how much it's changed as well, and whether British producers are the same. But I feel like children's producers have got these huge obstacles, but they seem to get through them with a bit of smile and a lot of love and a lot of, attention with each other and everywhere else. But they've got to raise so much money internationally, and that I'm interested in it's sort of heading to a conversation that's also affecting other parts of content, whether that's shifting the type of content that you can create because you're trying to appease ZDF and a lot of other people along the way, and also whether it's diluting the sense of Australianism in terms of what we're doing, and whether that's a factor that we really care about, or whether we do.
So I guess that was one of the other things that struck me when I returned, is there was a big sense of desire to make our programs generic in the sense that they could be from anywhere, and therefore in order to raise money from international sources. And so it kind of lost the Australian of its storytelling, its distinctiveness for me. And I'm of the view that, if Neighbours and Sons and Daughters and, those sorts of shows can sell to more than 115 countries, then surely we can create things that can do the same. And so I think, what we should be embracing Australia, we should be embracing the colours and the textures and the faces of Australia to tell our stories. And I think, we've had some small success over the last year in that direction, where we have pulled in international funding.
Right, with that same, do you want to talk about them?
Sure. So I guess Mustangs FC, which is a Matchbox Pictures production, which is about a female football team. It's a comedy drama, not slapstick comedy in any way, but a narrative comedy. And that has resonated extremely well. Okay. And I think the BBC are very close to doing it here. And it's very Australian, and it has Australian faces. It's actually, has a lot of diverse faces in it, but it's set in a Melbourne suburb. It looks like Melbourne. It has the Greek greengrocer and all of the elements that you would find in Australia. And that's been successful. We're hoping that our amazing co-production with NITV, Grace Beside Me, will be an international success. I think I saw Lois here.
There's Lois.
Just there.
Yeah, there you go.
And that is intrinsically amazing Australian story set in Bow Desert in Queensland, and features an Indigenous girl, and it's her story.
With narratives and live action, there's an ability to infuse, I think, Australianisms into that. With animation, you sort of do see a sense that people are pushing sometimes in different directions for a more generic voice and non-Australian feel. And is that...
There's no difference for me.
Right.
In fact, you can go even further, because look at the amazing colours that we have here, the reds, the turquoise, the greens, the blues. And, I don't mean literally, but be inspired by, and we are seeing that. I commissioned Bluey from Ludo Studios, which is a preschool series which will rival Peppa Pig, and that is distinctly Australian. It's has Queensland architecture as the houses, which you don't find anywhere else. Strange Chores is another animation series that is being done out of Media World in Melbourne, and that design has amazing colours. It's all of the colours that we see our Federation houses coloured, painted, all the rocks that we have.
But are you a part of are you with the producers trying to convince, or is it not really a problem really when you're trying to get other international buyers into the mix of the financing? Are you needing to be at that table now more than ever, or are you stepping away and letting the producers do that? Are you finding it easier for them to do it?
I think that international broadcasters and distributors will be mindful of it being too parochial. But I'm not saying be parochial. I'm not saying that it has to alienate international audiences, because children are the same wherever they are in the world. They might be richer and they might be poorer, but essentially, they are all insatiable for information. They love to laugh. They're curious about themselves and the world that they're in. And so if you take those universal themes, they resonate everywhere. Resilience, empathy, these are big words that are coming through in, the current world climate. And that's the same for people in Latin America as it is in Eastern Europe.
So I think the appeal of content is stronger than ever. I was reading this morning a story that said if you'd invested in $1,000 in Netflix in 2007, it would now be worth $120,000 or something like that.
Very rich.
Yeah, you are very rich. There we go. So I'm interested in whether we're all essentially fucked. At the end of the day, that we've still got this huge monolith that's, colonising and taking over content, and that really, as good as we are, and I'm interested in the response that the commercial televisions have kind of thrown their hands up and said, not for us anymore, handball it away, no responsibility for that part of the community in an intrinsic way. The BBC, I think, announcing throwing £35 million, but it's still against $1 billion of investment from the Netflix, I think, in children's, if you do the sums. There's responses that are going on, but are we responding in that way to essentially that very large SVOD platform and the degree to which children are gravitating towards that and to YouTube and to other platforms that aren't intrinsically necessarily Australian and all the things that go with that. So I know that's another big
it's a big question. I assume the same question was raised when television was launched and radio was seen as the dinosaur. It was the same when cable and satellite and digital cable companies started evolving and they said that terrestrial television was dead. It's kind of, these things are evolving and of course they will have impact, but children just want great stories. So we can't focus on YouTube. I can't make a cat video for $12.30. That would cost me $100,000 just to walk out the door to even talk to the cat. So it's kind of, you have to work within what you know and what you love and the resources that you have. Netflix is a huge global company that is obviously having impact everywhere. But, so are Time Warner, so are Disney, and so are Nickelodeon. And they've been around for 20 odd years now. And we're still surviving, as are the commercial networks. So you have to find your way in all of that. And it's about telling great stories that audiences want to engage with. And, whether that's $143 million an hour for The Crown, or whether it's the $230 an hour for a children's drama. Just managing expectations. There's great stories will engage audiences. I guess the one thing that is not in our control is the technology. And a public service broadcaster like the ABC is constantly having to strive and to reinvent its technology to be able to deliver that great content to audiences where they want it, how they want it. And we're also not in control of the fact that people outside of urban areas struggle with broadband and streaming and all of that stuff. So those factors are out of our control, but we work within them and we're doing as much as we can to change that.
Are you creating content knowing that the majority of people, and I don't know if this is an accurate assessment, but the majority of children that you're viewing it are going to be viewing it on iView or on other platforms, on maybe rather than your linear channels? Is that you're now kind of going, this is where they're going to see it?
We absolutely have that in mind, and we do as much as we can to transition between, the traditional TV format and all of the stuff that they're doing off traditional TV. We're streaming Good Game. We have shorts for Giggle and Hoot on our YouTube channel. Just small examples of, yes, we are moving in as much as we can into having our content available in as many places as possible for our audience to find. Obviously, there's an issue with rights, and the ABC. One of the great things about the ABC is that it does see that they have to pay for rights, and that finding the value of those rights is a whole other debate. But
let's have it today. Let's do that.
Okay. Here we go. But they are mindful that to exploit our content, we have to pay for those rights, and it's a struggle to do that with a finite budget, and in fact a budget that is decreasing over time because costs are going up.
Well, I want to just, before we get into the bowels of the ABC, if you were running the children's programming, investment, acquisition strategy at 7, 9 or 10, what would you be doing?
I'd be partnering with my friends at
the ABC.
The ABC.
You're just saying no.
Yeah, no. I think I'd be trying everything and anything, and working much more closely with my American friends. Those people have a lot of resources, and they know their audience impeccably well, and they know what works and what doesn't work. And there's probably some merit in partnering with US studios
to create the content that's going to work.
Yeah, for both of us. It's interesting because the ABC is working with Netflix, and there's no way we could have created the New Legend of Monkey if we hadn't had that investment. And other shows are also benefiting from that investment. And so there are ways of working with those big global networks. They don't have the same infrastructure in terms of editorial control, creative input. They are looking for that expertise around the world in their key markets. Australia, fortunately, being one of them.
Well, they've also eliminated that expertise from their overheads, haven't they? I mean, there used to be large children's departments in each of those broadcasters that were very close, I think, to understanding what children were after and working with us and others to do that. So there's a gap now that you'd sort of, I worry about, because it sets up a...
But there are also evolving experts in children's research and children separately. So there's a whole other industry that has evolved because of that.
And where would, if I'm interested, I know we're doing hypotheticals, but where should they be putting their content? Because the one thing that I don't see, and I've thought, and the reason I'm raising it with you, I suppose, is that I see that all boats rise actually for our industry. As much as we want to compete in different ways, there's a sort of a big piece missing from what's happening. I think it drags everything down a bit. So I see the opportunity to do the sort of thing that has happened with the app and iView for kids and other things, but and be much more aggressive about it. But I haven't seen the willingness yet from commercial broadcasters to do that.
Yeah, I guess, we're a small country. We only have 4.1 million children. So, scale is probably not the place to be, but, consolidating and working in partnership with each other is, I think, potentially going to leverage that situation. So, the worst thing for me is if the ABC didn't have any competition, because my bosses would just be saying, well, we're doing a great job, why do we need to invest more? We're not competing against anybody.
I'm interested that you feel that you've got competition at the moment. That's interesting. It's good. But I'm surprised you say that in some ways, because I don't see that you have a lot of competition.
Well, I think what I'm saying is I don't feel that I have competition, and that's a bad thing.
Yeah.
Because it drives prices up for all sorts of reasons, and it drives budgets down or licence fees down.
Is your greatest competitors then still in the cable television, Foxtel, Cartoon Network, Nickelodeon space for children?
It's surprising to me that they're not stronger in this market, because in the UK, my biggest competitor for preschool outside of Channel 5, which is a terrestrial broadcaster, was Nickelodeon and Disney. And for the older age group, they were directly competing with the Disney Channel and Cartoon Network, and, head to head. So here, it's surprising, and I guess it's the way that subscription works in this country and how many people subscribe, etc. But the subscriber base isn't big enough for them to be as competitive as I thought they might be.
I think
that's why I think, having a terrestrial outlet, a partnership with 7, 9 and 10
would make sense.
And
I wonder if everyone's still sitting in their separate divisions, still not talking to each other, which seems to be the pattern. But I think that over time you've seen, and I don't know if it's been the absence of local investment from those cable brands in this market, but at times they've been quite active and proactive around events and awards and engagement around, and I think that's helped them. But I wonder if the deals that have been struck internally between the platform and the channels that have kind of
maybe, and I don't know what those deals are.
Thankfully, we have people from those broadcasters here that will tell us, I'm sure. No.
It's interesting because I launched CBeebies here when I was controller of CBeebies, and there was a lot of excitement and embracement of CBeebies as a brand, but yet I find it's hardly watched by anybody because nobody can get it without paying for it.
Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about how the ABC is tracking. We touched on, and probably yes, I do need to get people to ask questions in a minute, or else I'll just keep talking to you forever and a day. It's fair to say, I think, if we're being blunt about it, you had a bit of a hard start here. It wasn't quite the role that you thought you were getting into, and I think that's evolved and changed, and I think you're in a happier space.
Yes.
And got the team sort of working around and working forward. There's been, you came in as well with a fair bit of criticism for us about the degree to which the brand had stopped investing in as heavily as it had been, and I think we've started in the last set estimates. We saw the numbers were improving a bit. So do you want to talk a bit about the journey for the last 1 year, 9 months, to sort of unpack what has happened and maybe where you want to go and the team you've got and the challenges ahead?
Okay, so yes, so when I arrived back, the ABC was kind of at the beginning of that reorganisation that it's seen happen in the last month or two, and so there was a period of time where they were, I guess, decentralising everything. So the children's department was broken up into its pieces, programming and production, etc. And once you do that, you lose momentum and scale within an organisation, and it's very difficult then to fight for resources. They've seen the light, and things are moving back together, and more investment has gone into children's.
And can I just check, because there's gone back together, but there's also been the structural changes that were announced in November, which I thought might also pull people around a bit, but that hasn't been the case for you.
It hasn't affected us directly at this moment in time, but I come from an organisation when I was at the BBC where we merged radio, television and online, and those producers and directors and craftspeople sat together, and that's exactly where we're getting to at the ABC now, with the merging of radio and television into entertainment and specialist is the name of the team, and obviously regional and local is the other big team, and then there's news. But so the idea is that we collaborate internally across platform, and that we craft ideas. Not everything has to have every platform involved in it, but the idea is that the concept is developed, and then manifestations of that can go to radio, television, or our digital outlets or third-party platforms. So that's the direction that we're going in, and it's only evolving over the last 6 weeks or so. But people are embracing it, which is a great thing.
Do you have a budget each year that you're given, or you set, or you have to fight for each? Like, I'm just wondering how it's now working for you in terms of
like any organisation, I have to put in a budget request from the pool, and I say what I need and what I don't need, and then that goes to the Director of Entertainment Specialists, David Anderson, and he negotiates the overall budget with our CFO.
Right.
So over the last year or so, we have seen an increase in investment in children's.
How much? How much you got?
Probably about $5 million, which is significant. It's not quite where we were before I arrived, when the channels were first launched and the investment was first given. But through the loud lobby groups of you and the ACTF and producers directly, the ABC took note and has started to invest more in our production. The question will be, can we sustain that?
And to that end, and I'm putting you in probably an awkward position, but you can maybe just wink in ready to say, but we always think that there's a strategic exercise for different reasons for the ABC to have a certain requirements on obligations, so that this dip and change that can happen across departments, especially as important as what you're finding yourself, you're the last man literally standing in terms of what's going on at the moment, is consistent. And I think there's value, objectively, as well as my own special interest in that, looking after people, to say that there's a consistency that's expected, or at least a target that's set in some ways. And you would have had that at the BBC. So do you understand why the ABC resisted so aggressively, or at least on a corporate level?
They have their overall budget, and they have strategic things that they have to deal with each year, so they want the flexibility to move that money into areas that need propping up. So for example, arts and science haven't had as much funding as the children's department over the last 3 or 4 years. So investment is going into science, arts and education. So as an organisation, as a public organisation, you need that flexibility. I think in any organisation you need the flexibility to move around the money as you see fit, as and when. And so quotas at the BBC were always a hindrance. I would be fudging as much as possible to get internal quotas done. So at the BBC, you had a 50% internal quota, and you had 50% external, but the BBC could apply for 25% of that extra. So you were always fighting in my case, it was always difficult to commission the internal production people, because they were old-fashioned and boring and didn't create the kinds of content that I wanted. So I spent a lot of money with the indies, but I could only get to 50%.
That's changed, I think, now, hasn't it?
Recently, yeah. But, I had to put Waverloo in Scotland to get funding out of Scotland, in the same way that we put production in Queensland or Victoria or the Northern Territory.
And I think that the in-house, out-house, we might want to, there may be questions about that. I feel that isn't as much the issue, because I know you do a few productions internally, but your love and engagement with externals is significant. I think it's more your overall, so that you're not the only one going into bat for yourself. There's a group of people that have got their eyes on it. And look, in effect, we're kind of doing that because we're needing to be vocal and asking for the numbers out of Senate estimates. But anyway, in a roundabout way, the pressure's there.
There's certainly, the ABC absolutely recognises that children are important to their future, as I would have thought that commercial networks might see that.
It does my head in that they don't. But anyway,
it's odd because if you don't grow up with a brand, you don't know it as an adult, so you won't go to it. Which is a vicious circle, I guess. But anyway, so they know that children are important to them. They do want to invest in children's audiences. They just need the flexibility to decide what's a priority in 1 year or another. But we have regular iconic shows still playing, like Play School and Giggle and Hoot, and our drama series and internal production. So
and look, I think Michelle and David have been very proactive around this, and it's full. I think it's always that thing about what happens when they're not there, and
I know,
and how that.
If you don't have me, I assume the next person would have just as much enthusiasm and passion for it, but it doesn't guarantee anything.
No,
I can see that.
All right, let's open up the floor. Sorry, I was looking for Lois and she's in the front row. Open up the floor for any questions straight away. Anyone want to be the first cab off the rank? Hey, Patricia, how are you? I might repeat the question.
Okay, just you mentioned that Arts and Sciences division were getting some more money. Do you work collaboratively like a co-production would externally to say, we've got a kids show, but it's actually an arts and science show, or it's a science show, and do you get some of their budget to put in? Like, does that work internally?
So they would want our budget.
Just a question around how the money might flow between different departments and whether you can kind of pilfer and partner in different ways.
Yes, we can absolutely partner with people, and we do. We have, particularly in the big kind of landmark series that the ABC do, like Stargazing and War on Waste, and other kind of, they call them tent poles, where we can collaborate across division or team or production unit. And generally, the people that we tend to gravitate to, like arts, education, science, history, etc., have much smaller budgets than us. So they see us as the cash cow.
Can I ask, you mentioned tent poles. Are there, you'd say maybe all your commissions are tent poles, but have you got the same strategy about trying to build one or two really big things in kids for the ABC? And
if I had the resources, I would absolutely have a Landmarks returning series, but we can't do that, and maybe we'll get onto that conversation around funding and how by the time you get to Series 3, nobody wants to fund you.
Let's have the conversation. You mean in terms of agencies and others that need to back it?
Internationally, everyone's building towards 5 seasons of something, and here after... Well, even the second season, you get less money just because it's the second season.
I know, and look, it hurts businesses as well as the ABC when you've got a brand that you've built and you can't necessarily monetise in a certain way. And the sort of inverse logic from the the agencies has always been that at some point they need to step back and fund the next series, and Joy, if it's so successful, why don't you step up more?
A vicious circle.
I know, it doesn't necessarily work. Okay.
But it should be a strategic decision, not just a policy.
Yeah, and I think that there's a bit of a push at the moment to release the 65 episode cap and change that, which may happen in the budget, but who knows? Anyway, Elena, hi.
My question is on the aspect of children's, because when you're dealing with children, you're actually dealing with their parents. So when my children are now 11 and 15, when they were young, I had the control of making sure they were watching ABC, because that was the time I could go take my shower, do on the washroom and do all those things. So the focus is on children, but where's the focus on protecting us, the parents? Because now with my son at 11 on YouTube, he's watching stuff that scares the shit out of him, and I've got to protect him from that, and I can't. So where's ABC trying to
educate parents?
That sort of market because there's a huge opportunity there.
I think it's a question about how parents are being, I guess, worked with the ABC, but also at a certain older generational element, and how to keep hooking them in. And we might want to talk about the split across age groups as part of that in terms of your strategy.
Parents are totally engaged with preschoolers, and they are our second audience. Everything we do comes through the child's perspective, but in preschool we're absolutely mindful of parents and carers and grandparents that are with them, and there is a lot of control over that. And ABC Kids as a babysitter, they do trust us, and they do put their children in front of us, and quite rightly. As you get older, parents have less interest because they want their children to grow up and develop and be individuals and find their own way in the world. And so there's a lot more trust in the child to do the right thing. And I guess that's the point here, is that parents instill the values in their children, and so teaching them as much as they can when they're younger on how to approach media is a good thing. We try to help that. ABC Education is doing more and more in the parenting space, and we do have media literacy and other skills that we're trying to develop.
Okay. Lois, hey.
Hi. I just wanted to ask how many roughly series are being commissioned each year, and what the sort of situation is with Screen Australia as a major partner for financing those series, and the number that can be commissioned.
So the question is, how many, get brass tacks, how many series of different, maybe across different genres you're able to do, and let's get into the data set, and the partnership with particularly Screen Australia. I don't know, you partner with, the production companies partner with other agencies, but Screen Australia's probably got a, is there a finite amount that you can get from Screen Australia, and how many times can you go through the one funding round? Because I think that's an issue for a lot of people. They go, oh my God, there's ABC's come in with 4 episode series, and we only want to give you one of those. So how does that work in practice?
It is something that we have to manage carefully, and we're very strategic in our approach in the content that we put forward to Screen Australia and other agencies. I don't think there's a finite number of series that we can actually produce, because I think depending on the production costs, the number of episodes, etc. But we aim to have 3 or 4 major drama series in production a year, and at the same time we have 2 or 3 major animation series. So it's not a huge amount. We have about then there's our internal production, of course, which is making a lot of stuff for ABC Me.
And that's more P in the older.
So internal production, you absolutely have Play School, which is an ongoing commission, and you have a lot of hours of giggle and hoot. And then last year I guess this is an area that we need to develop more, is in the preschool space, because last year we were only able to commission Justine Clark's show, which is a new live action show for ABC Kids, and I commissioned Bluey, the animated series, but that's not delivering until next year. So for ABC Kids, it's very, 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 very tiny. For ABC Me, there's, as I described, a number of drama series and animation series that we're producing. At the same time, we have our development cycle, and I could say that development, you usually want to develop 100 ideas to get down to 10 to commission 1. We have to be a bit more strategic than that. So when we develop something, we truly believe in it, and we're hoping that by the end of the development period that it will go to commission. Occasionally that doesn't happen. That's the nature of development. But we have 15 to 20 shows in development at any given time. So it's a lot. That's a lot of money as well. That's some millions of dollars going into development in shows that we then have to manage over the year, subject to the broadcast requirements, the off-air requirements, the Screen Australia requirements, and etc.
And that's your scripted, but then you've also got some non-scripted.
And non-scripted, we fully fund ourselves, essentially.
You don't go into Screen Australia for that.
No.
So, and how are you managing that relationship with Screen Australia in terms of, is there acknowledgement that you can pretty much only get 1 or 2 series up?
Yeah, if I was to change anything, it would probably be the funding model for factual content.
Right. How?
I would want to do more.
Right.
Well, so I can only do a number, maybe 2 series a year that I can fully fund myself. I would like to do 4. And so there's another 2 shows that I would love to commission each year, and I just can't afford to do it. And with factual content, it does feel a bit more parochial, so it's less likely to be
internationally picked up.
International.
Yeah. I thought that state agencies and even maybe Screen Australia had money to assist with factual.
We compete with the grown-ups. So,
Right.
and if you think that they see us as a cash cow, it's very difficult to go into Screen Australia through the factual door, because that content or that money is very much needed for prime time.
Okay. Other questions? Don't be shy. I could want to, while people are chewing over, I can see Rebecca, I want to ask where you think market opportunities for children's content is, and we started talking about this earlier when we were coming here. Different territories, what maybe other markets are doing. I see sort of aggressive producers in different areas, but maybe there's actually nothing there. So what's your sort of thoughts around where the market opportunity is for producers globally, given your many lenses across the broader worldwide industry?
I think animation is an area that is always going to find a place, whether it's a Netflix, whether it's a Disney, or whether it's a public service broadcaster. Animation's a great way to tell stories to the very young audience. So I'm talking 6 to 9-year-olds. They love animation stories, and it's also very easy to dub. And I'm so thankful that we're able to do a voiceover or voice performer better agreement here. It could go further, by the way. Well, you're competing with Canada. I can go to Canada, pull somebody off the street for $200.
Yeah.
And I have worldwide rights.
No. We're with you. I just don't know that the union's quite with us entirely, but
I get it. I want to pay.
Baby steps.
I want to pay.
Yeah, baby steps.
But I just want to pay up front. I don't want to. Look at all the animation on shelf that comes from Australia that is not being used because the residuals are like this.
So breaking I think most people realise that this is that one of the many hats we wear is that the residual structure around this industry was just dire, and that got broken in the ATRA, and it's now being shifted. And it doesn't help anyone that we had those residual structures, because everything's just sitting on shelves now. But there are renegotiations, I should say, for anyone who's got back catalogues. There are a whole heap of renegotiations going in now, and I think ABC Comedy's pushed the button on a few things, and that should be the case for kids, because we'd like to see that redone.
Yeah, that was a question.
Before I let you go, though, I think I know a burning question. I will come back, but I did want you to be a bit more detailed maybe about the different markets.
Sorry.
We talked about South America, Russia, there's Europe, there's Germany.
Russia was great about 5 or 6 years ago. It's kind of turned into the Wild West now, and kind of a bit more inward looking.
Well, given that you're Russian, this is...
Latin America is a burgeoning place with inbuilt quotas now in some of the
Brazil particularly.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot of requirement for content there. Mostly animation. I can't see us doing live action unless somebody has a great telenova idea. And drama, live action drama, particularly comedy, is de rigueur. Everybody needs it because it's being driven by the wonderful people at Netflix and Amazon, and potentially soon to come Apple. So I think if we can tell amazing stories with the distinctiveness of Australia, I think there is still a lot of opportunity out there for a global children's series.
Commissioned from bigger brands with you. And is it the idea still that you take the rights in Australia and they take global rights?
Yeah.
And that
we're very, very simple in our requirements. Australia and New Zealand.
Right. But Netflix has been okay with all of those relationships in the past. And just in terms of it's easy. Germany particularly has been a great source of love for a number of our series, a number of productions. They seem ZDF particularly is hungry for a lot of the work that we do.
They love Australian stories. They love the Australian environment, and I can see that in Scandinavia too.
Yeah, France, through the broadcasters there.
Yes, exactly through broadcasters.
And I say that because there's the reason, and I'm a little spoiler, but we are the organisation's pushing much more aggressively in terms of the trade conversations, because there are opportunities for people. We've got to be a bit more global. The reason we were in Germany and Denmark and Sweden last year was because of these relationships. And there will be, for those that, and we do ask that everyone do this, but we are trying to get a set of data together from the industry through the lockbox of Deloitte's, which we'll announce, I think, later today, to try to paint the picture. And the kids market is such an important part of that. The picture of what's being sold, how much money's coming in, the export opportunities, because that's actually a really important lever for us to be pushing at a lot of different things, including money for you guys. Sorry about that long-winded pause.
What are your views on 360 animation as a form of storytelling, both in terms of audience but also distribution at the ABC?
So 360 animation is for the point of view of audience and distribution.
Yeah. So you mean off traditional linear television onto other platforms?
For online, either through a headset or through a phone or tablet.
Yeah, sort of a VR-y sort of thing. Yeah, VR.
You know, I think virtual reality will actually probably get to us sooner rather than later. 3D didn't work as much as they all thought it would, but I think, you know, VR, as prices come down for headsets and stuff, will absolutely be an amazing way to, you know, capture and distribute stories. We're in the process of reviewing that ourselves. I don't know how the ABC will be able to invest in the technology behind that, but we're looking to partner with other people. So animation, I think, is very useful to go cross-platform to any digital medium, you know, whether it's short form or long form, or whether using any of the new technologies. I think that's probably one of the easiest things.
Yeah, and SBS is doing a VR. They've got a VR app and a few things. Anyway.
And by the way, if you look where Netflix are prioritising their investments, Europe, India, China, and Australia, they're probably the places that you want to develop trade relationships with.
Netflix, or about, okay, let's mention that to self. Any other last questions before? Oh, yeah. Okay. Right, what's your...
I'm just wondering what your opinion is on animated mini-series as opposed to the series of 26 eps or 65 eps, which everyone wants because it's great for your schedule and it creates lots of work for everyone. But are you interested at all?
It's so difficult. I would absolutely...
Question about mini-series versus 65 episodes. Sorry for the...
Yeah, sorry for you guys. I would love to be able to do animation shorts, and I just can't afford them in the scheme of things. I need scale to justify the spend. One day we might be in a place where we can do that much more easily. You know, in the old days, to do a 2D animated series was much more difficult than it is today, or, you know, with the software involved and stuff. So as prices come down, we might be able to do that. But the other thing is, like, audience impact. You know, to curate content, we need 5 episodes at a minimum, and then 5 episodes. How impactful is that on an audience with YouTube and all of our friends in the business? So it's quite tricky to get through.
All right, I might put a line under that and allow you to come up and say hello to Michael. You're going to hang around for a couple of minutes. There is coffee for days. Thank you very much if you'd like to hang around. But please join me in thanking Michael for a great chat today. Thank you. Thanks everyone for being here too. Bright and early. All right.
Sunshine, looking for a good